Of all the faces that flickered across television screens in the late 20th century, few are as instantly recognizable or as comforting as that of Florence Henderson. To a generation of viewers, she wasn't just an actress, she was Carol Brady, the ever-patient, ever-smiling matriarch of a picture-perfect blended family, living in a suburban home where every problem could be solved in under 30 minutes. Her iconic blue eyes and reassuring voice became a symbol of American motherhood, a cultural touchstone that defined the ideal of family for millions. But the woman who so effortlessly embodied this domestic perfection was, in reality, a universe of complexity and contradiction. Her life, far from the sun-drenched astroturf reality of the Brady home, was forged in darkness and hardship. She was a woman who navigated crushing poverty, debilitating health scares, and the quiet heartbreaks of a life lived in the public eye. The smile that America fell in love with was not one of bliss, but of resilience. It was the smile of a survivor. And while she was busy raising a generation of television viewers, she was also carefully guarding the secrets of her on-screen family, as well as a few shocking truths of her own. This is the story of the real Florence Henderson, a tale far more dramatic and infinitely more human than any script could ever capture. To understand Florence, you must first understand the world that created Carol Brady. The late 1960s in America was a time of profound contradiction. It was an era of seismic social change, of political turmoil, and a war that was tearing the country apart. Yet, on television, a different reality was being manufactured. As protests raged and headlines screamed, Hollywood offered an escape, a vision of a stable, harmonious America centered around the family. The Brady Bunch, which premiered in 1969, was the apex of this fantasy. It presented a world without shadows, a clean, well-lighted place where a lovely lady and a man named Brady could bring together 6 children with no more drama than a broken vase or a case of sibling rivalry. The show wasn't just entertainment, it was a cultural balm, a reassuring promise that underneath all the chaos, the bedrock of the American family was unshakable. Florence Agnes Henderson was born on Valentine's Day, 1934, in the tiny town of Dale, Indiana. She was the 10th and final child of a family mired in the suffocating poverty of the Great Depression. Her father, Joseph, was a sharecropper with a deep love for his children that was tragically eroded by alcoholism. Her mother, Elizabeth, was a pragmatic woman who faced the daily struggle of feeding 10 mouths with little more than grit and ingenuity. The Henderson home was not the spacious split-level house of the Bradys. It was a cold, dilapidated shack without indoor plumbing or central heating. Florence's childhood was, in her own words, a nightmare. In the brutal Indiana winters, she and up to 4 of her siblings would huddle together in a single bed, their combined body heat the only defense against the biting cold. This wasn't the stuff of sitcoms. It was a desperate fight for survival. She recalled the gnawing ache of hunger as a constant companion and the shame that came with their poverty. Yet, even in this bleak landscape, there was a glimmer of light. Her mother, Elizabeth, possessed a spirit that refused to be extinguished, and she passed that light on to her youngest daughter through the gift of song. Music was their escape. Elizabeth taught Florence to sing when she was just 2 years old, filling their small home with melodies that temporarily chased away the despair. Before she could even properly read, Florence had memorized over 50 songs. Music became her currency, a way to connect with a world beyond her grim reality. Her mother, ever resourceful, would barter her daughter's talent for essentials. Florence would sing for the family doctor in exchange for a checkup, or for the local grocer to help settle their bill. By the time she was 8, the family had affectionately nicknamed her Florence, and by 12, she was a local celebrity, her powerful voice echoing through the aisles of grocery stores, a small beacon of hope in a town struggling to get by. This childhood, a world away from the Brady's California suburbs, was the crucible that forged Florence Henderson. It instilled in her an unshakable work ethic and a deep understanding of human suffering. It also lit a fire within her, a desperate desire to escape, to build a life of security and warmth that she had never known. Her talent was her only ticket out, and she clung to it with everything she had. In 1951, she graduated from St. Francis Academy in Kentucky. With a fierce determination that belied her 17 years, she packed her bags and boarded a train for New York City. She had been accepted into the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts, a world of unimaginable promise. She found lodging at the Three Arts Club, a chaperoned residence for young women pursuing careers in the arts. Her room was so small she compared it to a closet, but after the crowded poverty of her childhood, it felt like a kingdom. She threw herself into her studies, her raw talent quickly polished by professional training. Within a year, she made her Broadway debut in the chorus of the musical Wish You Were Here. It was a small part, but it was a start. 2 years later, in 1954, she landed the leading role in the long-running musical Fanny. It was a breakout performance that would span an astonishing 888 shows. At just 20 years old, Florence Henderson was a bona fide Broadway star. The girl from the dirt-poor fields of Indiana was now the toast of the Great White Way. But just as her career was reaching its zenith, disaster struck. In the mid-1950s, Florence began to experience hearing problems. She was diagnosed with otosclerosis, a hereditary bone abnormality in the inner ear that was progressively robbing her of her hearing. For a singer, a performer whose entire craft was built on sound and pitch, it was a terrifying diagnosis, a potential career death sentence. The prospect of living in a world of silence, unable to hear the music that had been her salvation, was a nightmare, worse than any poverty she had endured. Fortunately, a delicate and risky surgery known as a stapedectomy was successful. Her hearing was saved, and her career could continue. She had stared into the abyss and, not for the last time, had willed herself back into the light. As her professional life flourished, so too did her personal life. In 1956, she married stage manager and producer Ira Bernstein. Together they began what she would later call her own Brady Bunch, having 4 children, Barbara, Joseph, Robert, and Elizabeth. She was now a wife and a mother, juggling the demands of a burgeoning career with the realities of raising a family. This was the life she had dreamed of, a stable, loving home, a world away from the chaos of her youth. Her television debut came in 1958 in a musical adaptation of Little Women. She was becoming a familiar face to American audiences, a frequent and beloved guest on talk shows and variety programs. In an era dominated by men, she made history by becoming the first woman to ever guest host The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. It was a groundbreaking achievement that showcased her quick wit and easy charm. She wasn't just a pretty singer, she was a formidable television personality in her own right. Then, in 1968, a call came that would change her life forever. Producers were casting a new sitcom about a blended family. The role was Carol Brady, the warm, unflappable mother of 3 girls. But Florence Henderson was far from a shoo-in. The part had first been offered to another Broadway legend, Shirley Jones, who turned it down, famously stating she didn't want to be known for just pulling a pot roast out of the oven. The role was then promised to actress Joyce Bulifant, who was known for her bubbly, comedic persona. Henderson was in Scandinavia filming the movie musical Song of Norway When she got the call to fly to Hollywood for a screen test, it was a last-minute opportunity. Exhausted from her flight, she arrived at Paramount Studios to find that the makeup department had already gone home for the day. So she did her own hair and makeup and walked onto the set. There was an immediate and palpable chemistry with the other actors. The producers knew they had found their Carol. For her role in Song of Norway, Florence had been required to shave her head. When Paramount officially picked up the Brady Bunch, her hair was only just beginning to grow back in a short, pixie-like crop, hardly the look for a quintessential American housewife. And so for the entire first season of the show, Carol Brady's famously coiffed blonde flip was, in fact, a wig. From the very beginning, Florence had a complex relationship with the character of Carol Brady. She admired Carol's patience and love for her family, but she also found the character one-dimensional and unchallenging. Florence was a real-life working mother who had fought her way out of poverty. Carol Brady, by contrast, seemed to exist in a conflict-free bubble, her biggest challenges revolving around school plays and puppy love. Henderson repeatedly petitioned the show's creator, Sherwood Schwartz, to give Carol a job or a hobby outside the home, something that would make her more relatable and more like the woman Florence actually was. The producers, however, were committed to their idealized vision, and her requests were consistently denied. The demands of the show were immense. For the 5 seasons that the Brady Bunch was on the air, Florence lived a grueling bi-coastal life. She would film in Los Angeles during the week, then, every Friday night, she would board a plane to New York to spend the weekend with her husband and 4 children. On Sunday, she would fly back to LA to start the cycle all over again. She was determined to be present for both her real family and her television family. But the constant travel and relentless schedule took a toll. She was living 2 lives, perpetually exhausted but driven by a sense of duty to both. The show was a massive hit, but the financial rewards for the cast were surprisingly meager. Under the standard contracts of the time, the actors were paid for the initial run of the show and for the first 5 years of reruns. After that, the royalty payments stopped. As the Brady Bunch became a global phenomenon, syndicated in countless countries, and spawning a merchandising empire, the studio and the network raked in hundreds of millions of dollars. The cast, including Florence, saw almost none of it. "It's the most licensed product in the history of Paramount," she once lamented, "and we get Zippo." After 29 years of marriage, Florence and Ira Bernstein decided to divorce. The news came as a shock to the public, who couldn't reconcile the breakup with the perfect image of America's favorite mom. Florence, fiercely protective of her family, kept the details of the split private, refusing to feed the gossip columns. But privately, she was devastated. The stable family life she had worked so hard to build had fractured. The end of her marriage, combined with the pressures of her career, plunged her into a period of intense personal struggle. By the early 1980s, she had developed a crippling fear of flying, a terrifying phobia for someone whose life depended on travel. She also began to suffer from severe stage fright, a paralyzing anxiety that made performing an ordeal. Traditional therapy offered little relief. Desperate, she turned to a less conventional method, hypnotherapy. She became a patient of Dr. John Kappas, a hypnotherapist who specialized in treating phobias. The results were transformative. Through their sessions, Kappas not only helped her conquer her fear of flying and her stage fright, but he also helped her heal her broken heart. A profound connection grew between them, and in 1987, Florence Henderson married the man who had helped her find her footing again. Their love was a quiet, healing force in her life. She was so impressed by the power of hypnotherapy that she eventually became a certified hypnotherapist herself, though she never practiced professionally. "If I didn't have a career," She once said, "I would do that full time." Life on the set of the Brady Bunch was its own unique universe, a strange blend of professional work and surrogate family dynamics. And at the center of it all was Florence, the steady maternal figure who held everything together, both on and off camera. Her relationships with her television family were complex, loving, and at times deeply challenging. There was the innocent crush from her on-screen son Barry Williams, who played Greg Brady. When he was just 15 years old, he boldly asked his 36-year-old television mom out on a date. Florence, ever gracious, handled the situation with gentle humor. She agreed to a platonic dinner, with Barry's older brother acting as chauffeur. She recalled giving him a sweet, sisterly peck on the cheek at the end of the night. She would later joke about it, saying, "I had 4 of my own. I didn't need another one," and quipped that Barry had a crush on everyone, including at one point her own daughter, Barbara. It was a harmless episode, but it highlighted the strange blurred lines of their on-screen, off-screen family. A more complicated situation arose years later with Maureen McCormick, who played the beautiful and popular Marcia Brady. In her tell-all memoir, Here's the Story, McCormick painted a portrait of Florence that was startlingly at odds with her public image. She claimed that Henderson was a shameless flirt who would often sunbathe topless in her dressing room and offered body advice. The headlines were sensational, creating a scandal that threatened to tarnish the wholesome legacy of the show. Florence's response was a masterclass in grace under pressure. She never outright denied the claims, but instead gently chalked them up to McCormick's selective memory. She understood the pressure from publishers to create sensationalism and refused to be drawn into a public feud with the young woman she still considered one of her kids. "I try not to judge the kids too harshly," she said. "They all turned out pretty well." Remarkably, her refusal to hold a grudge allowed their friendship to endure. Years later, in what would be one of her final public appearances, Florence was in the audience of Dancing with the Stars, cheering enthusiastically for Maureen McCormick. It was a poignant and public display of forgiveness, a testament to a bond that a scandalous book could not break. But of all the relationships forged on that set, none was more profound or more secretly guarded than the one she shared with her television husband, Robert Reed. Reed, who played the steadfast patriarch Mike Brady, was a classically trained Shakespearean actor who often chafed at the simplistic, sometimes silly, scripts of the sitcom. He was notoriously difficult on set, frequently arguing with the writers and producers over what he considered to be unbelievable plot lines or inauthentic dialogue. Florence noticed early on that Robert seemed particularly uncomfortable during their romantic scenes. There was a stiffness to him, a hesitation in their embraces that felt like more than just professional detachment. One day, in a moment of quiet confidence, Robert Reed shared with Florence his deepest secret, a truth that, in the Hollywood of that era, could have destroyed his career. He was a gay man. In that moment, Florence Henderson ceased to be just his co-star. She became his confidant, his protector, and his fiercest ally. She gave him her solemn promise that his secret was safe with her. Understanding the source of his discomfort, she took it upon herself to make their on-screen marriage believable. The two would rehearse their scenes of affection in private, working through the awkwardness so that when the cameras rolled, Mike and Carol Brady's romance looked natural and loving. "I never, ever mentioned it to anyone," she would later state. "He was an unhappy man. I think he suffered from a great deal of shame about his sexuality." For nearly the entire time she knew him, she kept his secret locked away, creating a safe space for him in a world that would have judged him harshly. Their on-screen chemistry, so beloved by millions, was a testament not to a real romance, but to a deep and abiding friendship built on trust and mutual protection. Years later, in 1992, Florence received a devastating phone call. It was Robert Reed. He told her he was dying from a rare form of colon cancer. Then he made a heartbreaking request. He asked if she would be the one to call the Brady kids and tell them the news, to break the heart of their television family one last time. It was a final act of trust, placing the emotional care of the family he loved into the hands of the woman who had always been its anchor. After Robert Reed passed away, the details from his death certificate were made public, revealing that he had been HIV positive at the time of his death. The revelation sparked a firestorm of media speculation about his private life. It was only then, with his secret already exposed to the world, that Florence Henderson finally shared the truth she had held for so long. She confirmed that Robert Reed had been gay, not as a piece of gossip, but as a way to contextualize his life, to honor the man she knew, and to finally put the rumors to rest. Her loyalty had extended beyond his life, a final act of friendship to protect his dignity even in death. While the story of Robert Reed was her most profound secret, Florence's own life held a few bombshells that defied her wholesome image. In her 2011 autobiography, Life is Not a Stage, she revealed a surprising and spicy detail from her past. In the 1960s, she had a one-night stand with John Lindsay, the charismatic and very married mayor of New York City. She wrote that after a flirtatious evening, she woke up in his hotel room with a case of crabs. The anecdote was shocking, funny, and deeply human. It was the ultimate contradiction to the Carol Brady persona, a reminder that the real Florence Henderson was a woman of flesh and blood who lived a life filled with passion and imperfection. She was not a saint in a polyester pantsuit. She was a modern woman who had lived, loved, and made mistakes just like everyone else. As the years went on, Florence Henderson gracefully transitioned from television star to beloved cultural icon. She became a legend of the game show circuit, a regular on shows like Hollywood Squares and the $25,000 Pyramid. She also became a familiar face in commercials, most notably as the long-running spokesperson for Wesson Oil and Polydent denture adhesive. She joked that her commercial work bought a lot of music and a lot of clothes. When the satirical The Brady Bunch movie was released in 1995, she was initially offered a small, dismissive cameo. She turned it down, feeling it was disrespectful to the character she had created. However, when the film was test screened for audiences, there was an uproar. Viewers were angry. They wanted their Carol Brady. The producers had no choice but to go back to Florence, hat in hand, offering her more money and complete creative control over her scene. She accepted, filming a memorable cameo as the grandmother of the new Carol Brady, a final winking tribute to the role that had defined her. The legacy Florence Henderson leaves behind is as multifaceted as the woman herself. Her portrayal of Carol Brady is undeniably her most enduring contribution to popular culture. In a 2006 poll by TV Guide, 45% of viewers said that Carol Brady had shaped their perception of what a housewife should be, outranking every other television mother. She had, as she put it, staked her claim in the culture. For a generation of children, many of whom came from broken or troubled homes, she was a surrogate mother. People wanted me to adopt them, she often shared. Through the magic of television, she had a hand in raising a generation, but her true significance lies beyond the screen. It lies in the strength of the girl from Indiana who sang for her supper and willed herself to Broadway. It lies in the courage of the young woman who faced down deafness and refused to let it steal her dream. It lies in the quiet loyalty of a friend who kept a secret for decades to protect a man she loved, and it lies in the grace of a woman who navigated public scandal and private heartbreak with a dignity and resilience that was far more inspiring than any sitcom script. Florence Henderson passed away suddenly on Thanksgiving Day in 2016 at the age of 82 from heart failure. Her death was unexpected, a shock to her family, friends, and legions of fans. She had been active and vibrant until the very end, a testament to her enduring spirit. When we look back on her life, it's easy to get lost in the nostalgia of the Brady house. But the real story, the more powerful story, is that of Florence herself. She once explained the enduring appeal of the Brady Bunch by saying it was all about family. It was one of those rare moments where everything came together for everybody. She was right, but she was the one who held it all together, both on the screen and off. She created a fantasy of a perfect family for the world, all while navigating the messy, beautiful, and often painful reality of her own. She showed us the loving face of Carol Brady, but she lived the heroic life of Florence Henderson, and that is a legacy far greater than any television show.